The judge's gavel hasn't stopped echoing in my ears. Even now, sitting in my small kitchen with cold tea in front of me, the sound is still there. That sharp, definitive crack of wood on wood, the sound that separated my life into before and after. A murmur ran through the courtroom that day. No one knew what to say. I didn't know what to say either. But that moment, the moment when Victoria's hand connected with my face in front of the judge, the bailiffs, and everyone else watching, that moment wasn't really the beginning. The beginning was much earlier. It was quieter. It was the kind of beginning that you don't recognize as the beginning until you're standing in the aftermath, looking back and seeing how all the pieces fit together. I'm Dorothy. I'm 82 years old now, and I've lived a quiet life. My husband, James, passed away 7 years ago. We had been married for 53 years. We raised 3 children together, Michael, Catherine, and David. We built a home, we built a life, we built the kind of ordinary existence that most people never think about until it's threatened. After James died, I thought my story was mostly written. I thought I had maybe 10, 15 good years left. Years to spend with my grandchildren, maybe to travel a little, to sit in my garden and watch the seasons change. I thought my job was done. I thought I had earned a quiet ending. I was wrong about that. Very wrong. The trouble began, in retrospect, around 15 years ago. Michael called me one evening and said he had something to tell me. The way he said it, careful, excited, nervous, I knew it was something important. He came over to my house on a Saturday afternoon, and he looked younger than I'd ever seen him. He looked like a man about to change his life. I met someone, he said. Her name is Victoria. She's remarkable, Mom. She's brilliant, she's beautiful, she's everything I never knew I wanted. I remember smiling at him. Michael was 35 years old at the time, and he had been alone for too long. He had thrown himself into his work, into building his career in software development. He was successful, yes, but he was lonely. I could see the loneliness in him, the way it had settled into his bones and become part of his posture. I'm happy for you, I told him. When do I get to meet her? Soon, he said. Very soon. She wants to meet you, too. She said, family is important. He seemed almost surprised by that. Like the idea that someone would value family was something new to him, something he hadn't considered before. Victoria came to Sunday dinner the following week. I remember what she wore, a pale gray dress that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She wore it like armor. Her blonde hair was perfect, styled in a way that seemed to require professional maintenance. Her nails were immaculate. She looked like the kind of woman who had never had to worry about money, who had never had to make difficult choices, who had glided through life on a cushion of privilege. And yet there was something else in her too, something sharp underneath the elegance, something calculating in the way her eyes moved around my home, taking inventory, not of what I had, but of what I lacked. "What a charming house," she said, and I heard the unspoken end of that sentence, "for someone your age." I should have recognized the warning then. I should have seen the predator inside the pretty package. But I was blinded by the simple fact that my son was happy. Michael held Victoria's hand at dinner like he was afraid she might disappear. He looked at her like she had invented the concept of perfection. I wanted him to be happy, so I invited her back. 3 months later, Michael told me he had proposed. 6 months after that, they were married. It was a beautiful wedding, expensive, tasteful, everything that Victoria wanted. My other children came, my grandchildren came. We smiled for the photographs and acted like this was a joyous occasion without complications. Victoria's parents didn't attend the wedding. I remember Michael mentioning this in passing, and Victoria dismissing it with a wave of her hand. They don't approve of Michael's career, she said. They wanted me to marry someone in finance, someone more traditional. It seemed like a small thing, a family disagreement. I didn't know then that Victoria had already cut her parents out of her life, that she had spent years creating distance between herself and anyone who might see her clearly. The first few years of their marriage seemed good. Victoria and Michael bought a house in the suburbs. It was a beautiful home, modern and expensive. I visited sometimes, though Victoria always made me feel like I was an inconvenience. The way she would leave the room when I arrived, the way she would look at her phone during conversations, the way she would sigh if I stayed longer than an hour. All of these small behaviors added up to a kind of cold dismissal. But Michael loved her. That was the thing that mattered. He loved her, and he seemed happy most of the time. Then Sophie was born. I remember the first time I held her. She was so small, so perfect, so completely dependent on the world around her. Michael stood next to me, watching me cradle his daughter, and I saw something shift in his face, a completion, a new understanding of what love meant. "She's beautiful," I told him. "She looks like you," he replied. Same chin, same way of observing everything. Victoria stood in the doorway of the hospital room. She didn't come closer. She didn't ask to hold the baby. She just stood there, watching Michael hold my hand while I held their daughter. "The pediatrician said she's perfect," Victoria said finally. "No defects, no problems." It was an odd thing to say about a newborn. But I didn't think too much about it at the time. I was too busy being a grandmother. Sophie was 7 when I first noticed that something was wrong. Not with her. Sophie was a bright, curious, sensitive child who asked questions about everything and noticed things that most adults missed. What was wrong was with her eyes, with the way she watched her mother. Children develop a kind of radar for violence. Not just physical violence, though that's part of it, but emotional violence, the kind of cruelty that doesn't leave bruises, that lives in tone of voice and withheld affection and constant criticism. Sophie had developed that radar, and it was pointed directly at her mother. I noticed it during a visit. Sophie was drawing, and Victoria came into the room. "Sophie, why are you making such a mess?" Victoria said, though there was barely any mess at all. Sophie immediately put down her crayons and started cleaning up. Her small face went carefully blank. "I'm sorry, Mommy," she said, in the voice of a child who had learned that her natural self was something to apologize for. After Victoria left the room, I watched Sophie pick up the crayons again, but the joy had drained out of her. Her drawing became mechanical, careful, an attempt to create something that wouldn't be criticized. That night, I called Michael. "How is Victoria with Sophie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "She's fine," he said immediately. "Why? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing. I just wanted to check." But something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. I didn't say anything to Michael, though. What would I have said? That I didn't like the way Victoria spoke to our granddaughter? That I thought she was emotionally cold? These weren't things I could prove. These were just the observations of a grandmother, and I had learned long ago that grandmothers' observations are easily dismissed. So I did what I've always done when I sense pain but don't know how to address it. I created comfort in small gestures. I baked cookies that Sophie loved. I told her stories. I made her feel seen and valued when she was with me. I tried to build a buffer between her and whatever emotional cruelty she was experiencing at home. I should have done more. That's what haunts me now. I should have asked more questions. I should have pushed harder. I should have been willing to create conflict if it meant protecting that child. But I was a coward. I was afraid of losing access to Sophie. I was afraid of making Michael uncomfortable. I was afraid of being that interfering mother-in-law that everyone complains about. So I made tea and cookies, and I did what grandmothers do. The business started when Sophie was 9 years old. Michael came to me excited, full of ideas. He and Victoria had decided to start a company together. It was going to be an educational software platform for children. Interactive learning tools designed by child psychologists and programmed by people like Michael. The concept was sound. The market was perfect. Everyone they pitched to was enthusiastic. But then something happened that I didn't fully understand at the time, though I should have recognized the warning signs. Victoria took over the business side of things. Michael was the creative force, the programmer, the person with the actual technical skills that made the product possible. But Victoria was the businesswoman. She handled the finances. She managed the employees. She interfaced with investors. And slowly, Michael retreated from the day-to-day operations of the business. Victoria is better at this than I am, he told me. She has a head for business. I'm better when I'm just coding, creating. Let her handle the rest. This made sense, in a way, but it also meant that Michael was becoming increasingly isolated from what was happening in his own company. He went to his programming office, he did the work, he came home. He wasn't aware of what Victoria was doing in the administrative offices. He wasn't aware of the decisions being made in his name. Sophie noticed this before anyone else did. She came to stay with me one weekend when she was 10. Michael had to work, Victoria said. She had things to do, so could I take Sophie for the weekend? I would have taken Sophie any time. She was a light in my life by then. The joy I found with her was the purest thing I experienced in those years. That Saturday, we went to the park. Sophie was quieter than usual, more withdrawn. We sat on a bench, watching the other children play, and I asked her what was wrong. "Mommy is different at work," she said finally. "Different from how she is at home." "Different how?" I asked. "At work, she's nice to people. She laughs. She's like she's pretending to be someone else. But at home, she's just angry all the time." I remember feeling a chill run through me at those words. A child of 10 years old, watching her mother perform an alternate personality for strangers while being cruel to her family. "Does your mommy ever do things that hurt your feelings?" I asked carefully. Sophie looked at me for a long time. I could see her struggling with something, deciding whether to tell me the truth or protect her mother. "She says I'm not good enough," Sophie said finally. "She says I'm not smart enough, not pretty enough, not well-behaved enough. She says if I was a better daughter, she wouldn't be so disappointed." Sophie was 10 years old. She was brilliant, beautiful, and kind, and her mother had convinced her that she was a disappointment. I held her that day while she cried, and I made a decision. I decided that when Sophie came to stay with me, I would be her refuge. I would remind her constantly that she was valuable, that she was loved, that her mother's words were not truth. It wasn't enough, but it was what I could do. What I should have done was tell Michael. What I should have done was force a conversation. What I should have done was suggest that they get family therapy, that they address whatever was happening in their home. But Michael was gone by then. I don't mean physically gone. I mean emotionally gone. He was trapped in the world that Victoria had created around him, a world in which she was the decision maker, the authority, the center of everything. He had abdicated his responsibilities. He had given all his power to her. It was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it yet. Around that time, the business started to grow. It became more successful than anyone had anticipated. They got investment from venture capital firms. They started hiring. The software they had created was genuinely innovative, genuinely valuable. It looked like Michael and Victoria were going to be very wealthy. Young innovators changing education. There was a photo of Michael looking uncomfortable in a suit and Victoria looking radiant, like she had discovered something precious and was proud of it. The caption underneath read, "Victoria Torres leads the charge while Michael Chen provides the vision." But that's not how the company worked. Michael provided everything: the vision, the technical expertise, the actual creation of the product. Victoria managed the finances and the administration. Yet, the narrative was that she was the real creator and he was just the technical support. I think that's when Victoria decided exactly what she wanted to do. I didn't know this at the time, of course. I was just a grandmother, visiting occasionally, trying to love my granddaughter and offer her refuge from whatever emotional cruelty was happening in her home. But looking back now, I can see the moment when Victoria's intention crystallized. It was around the time the company became truly successful. It was the moment when she realized exactly how much money there was to be made, and how she could make it all herself if Michael wasn't there. It took Victoria 3 years to build her case against Michael. 3 years of careful planning. 3 years of creating evidence, forging documents, building a narrative. 3 years of training the accountant to falsify records. 3 years of making Michael look like a criminal while she positioned herself as the victim. I didn't know any of this was happening. None of us did. From the outside, their life looked like success. They had the house, the cars, the vacation homes. Sophie went to private school. Victoria dressed in designer clothes. Michael got recognition in his field for the technical innovations he had created. But inside, Victoria was constructing a web. She opened secret bank accounts in Michael's name. She transferred company funds into those accounts. She created email trails showing Michael discussing embezzlement with people he had never met. She forged his signature on documents authorizing the transfers. And all the while, she was documenting everything, building her case, preparing for the moment when she would disappear Michael's money and leave him holding the bag. What I didn't understand at the time was why she was doing this. She was already wealthy. Michael made good money. They were successful. Why would she need to destroy him? But that's not how people like Victoria think. For people like her, it's not about money. It's about power. It's about control. It's about creating a narrative in which she wins and everyone else loses. Sophie was 13 when it all came to a head. She came to stay with me one weekend, and I could see immediately that something had changed. She looked older, sadder, more aware of the world's cruelty. "What's wrong?" I asked her. She took a long time to answer. We were sitting in my garden, on the bench where we always sat, watching the tomato plants grow. "My parents aren't getting along anymore," she said finally. "They don't fight. That's the weird part. They just don't talk to each other. And Mommy keeps saying things about Dad, about how he's not who she thought he was, about how she can't trust him." "What kinds of things?" I asked. "She says he's stealing from the company, that he's been taking money that doesn't belong to him." The world went very still at that moment. I remember the feeling of everything stopping, of my heart pausing mid-beat. "Has she told your father this?" I asked. "I don't think so, but she's been on the phone with lawyers. I heard her talking to someone about protecting herself and documenting everything." I held Sophie that day, and I felt the weight of something settling on me. I felt the weight of understanding, even though I didn't have all the facts yet, that something terrible was about to happen. The next day, Michael called me. "Mom," he said, and his voice was different, smaller, like a man who had suddenly understood that he was in danger. "Can you come over? I need to talk to you." I drove to his house on a Tuesday afternoon. It was the first time I'd noticed how cold his home felt, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The expensive furniture, the perfect decor, none of it made the place feel like a home. It felt like a showroom. Michael was sitting in the kitchen when I arrived. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Victoria is saying that I stole money from the company," he told me without preamble. "She has documents, bank statements, emails. Everything proves that I took money and hid it." I sat down slowly. "Did you?" I asked. "No, of course not. I would never. Mom, I would never do that." And I believed him. I have always believed him. Because I know my son. I have watched him his entire life, and I have never known him to be dishonest, to be criminal, to be anything other than fundamentally good. "What does Victoria say?" I asked. "She says she has proof. She wants me to admit what I did, or she's going to the police. She's also filing for divorce. She's asking for full custody of Sophie, the house, half the company, and half our assets." "Can she do that?" "She has lawyers. She has documents. Whether they're real or forged, she can certainly try." I sat with Michael for hours that day. He showed me some of the documents Victoria had presented. Some of them looked authentic. Bank statements with his name on them, emails that appeared to be from his email address. Everything was very professional, very convincing. But something about them felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it exactly. It was just a sense, a grandmother's intuition, that these documents had been created rather than discovered. "Have you hired a lawyer?" I asked. "Yes, he's reviewing everything. He says it could go either way. If I can't prove these documents are forged, I could be convicted of embezzlement." "They'll believe you," I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. Michael smiled sadly. "Will they? Or will they believe the woman with all the documentation, all the evidence, all the lawyers?" That night, I went home and I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about the situation. Michael was being framed, that much I was certain of. But how do you prove that someone has fabricated evidence? How do you prove something didn't happen? With extreme difficulty. That's when I started thinking about what I could do. I couldn't practice law. I couldn't access company records. I couldn't investigate the documents. But I could listen. I could pay attention. I could look for inconsistencies. So I made a decision that would consume the next 6 months of my life. I decided to investigate my daughter-in-law. I am not a detective. I have never been trained in investigation. I have spent my life as a teacher, then as a mother, then as a grandmother. I know about children and learning and how to create spaces where people feel safe to be themselves. I do not know about tracking down evidence or confronting criminals or gathering documentation that will hold up in court. But I am old, and I am patient, and I have spent 82 years learning how to read people. I have learned how to see the inconsistencies in their stories, the contradictions in their behavior, the ways they betray themselves when they're lying. And I had access to Sophie. I had access to Michael. I had access to people who worked at the company. I had time and I had motivation. So I started investigating. The first thing I did was call Michael's business partner, James, who worked with him on the technical side of the company. "I'm concerned about Michael," I told him. "Victoria is saying some things about him that don't make sense to me. I'm trying to understand what's really going on." James sighed. He seemed relieved to talk to someone about it. "Mrs. Chen, I don't know everything," he said. "But I know that the documentation Victoria is presenting doesn't add up. The email trails look fabricated. The bank transfers don't match the actual money movement. Something is very wrong." "Would you be willing to look into it officially?" I asked. "I've already started," he said. "But Victoria controls most of the financial records. She controls the employee files. She controls access to the servers. It's hard to investigate when the person you're investigating controls all the evidence." This was the central problem. Victoria had positioned herself perfectly to commit fraud without being caught. She was the administrator. She was the keeper of records. She had access to everything. And she had used that access to build an airtight case against Michael. The second thing I did was visit the office. I called and said I wanted to bring Michael lunch, that I wanted to see where he worked. Victoria, who was usually dismissive of me, didn't object. Perhaps she was confident in her plan. Perhaps she thought I was just a harmless old woman. Michael showed me around the office. It was impressive. Modern, creative, full of young people working on computers, sketching ideas, creating the educational software that was making them all wealthy. In the back, there was a financial office. A woman named Rachel sat at the desk there, managing the books. Rachel was about 60, with nervous eyes and the look of someone who was carrying a heavy secret. I watched her carefully as Michael introduced us. I watched how she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. I watched the tension in her shoulders. "Rachel, how long have you worked here?" I asked. 7 years, she said, "since the beginning of the company." "You must know Michael and Victoria's work very well then." Something flickered across Rachel's face. "Yes, I do." After we left the office, I engineered a reason to go to the bathroom. I waited a few minutes, then I went back. I found Rachel alone. "Mrs. Chen," she said, looking around to make sure no one could hear us. "What are you doing here?" "I want to understand what's really happening," I told her. "I want to know if my son is really guilty of what Victoria is accusing him of." Rachel looked like she was going to refuse. Then she looked like she was going to tell me everything. "I can't," she said finally. "I can't talk about this. Victoria said if I talked to anyone, she would make sure I never worked in finance again. She has connections. She has power." "Victoria is lying about Michael," I said quietly. "She's framing him. I'm going to prove it. But I need help." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She admitted. "She asked me to falsify the records," she admitted. "She asked me to show money movements that never happened. She asked me to create email trails. I refused at first, but then she threatened me. She said if I didn't cooperate, she would say I was the one stealing. She said she had documentation that proved it." Rachel was trapped, caught between loyalty to Michael and fear of Victoria's power. "I need to know everything," I said. "Not now, but sometime, when it's safe." Rachel gave me her personal email address, written on a piece of paper that she then destroyed. "I'll contact you," she said, "but it has to be careful. She watches everything." That's how I started gathering evidence. One conversation, one piece of information at a time. I was patient, I was methodical, I was thorough. I found out that the emails Victoria had presented as evidence of Michael's embezzlement were sent from accounts that were created on dates after the supposed crimes. I found out that the bank accounts were opened with signatures that could be forged. Victoria had access to Michael's signature through company documents and could have practiced copying it. I found out that Victoria had been systematically moving money into these accounts for over a year and then systematically documenting it as if Michael had done it. Most importantly, I found an email from Victoria to Rachel dated 3 years earlier that discussed the plan in explicit detail. "I'm going to make this look like Michael has been stealing," Victoria wrote. "I'm going to create documentation that proves he's taking money. Then I'm going to expose him. He'll be convicted. I'll take the company, the money, the house, and Sophie. He'll go to prison. We all win, except him." That email was the smoking gun. Rachel sent it to me anonymously from a secure email account that couldn't be traced. When I received it, I read it 3 times to make sure I understood exactly what I was looking at. This was the evidence. This was the proof that Michael was being framed. This was the documentation that would vindicate him. And I did what seemed logical. I did what I thought I should do. I did nothing with it. Instead, I waited. For 6 months, I held on to that email and the other evidence I had gathered, and I did nothing. I told myself it was because I needed to build an airtight case. I told myself it was because I needed to understand every detail before I acted. I told myself it was because I wanted to be absolutely certain. The truth was more complicated. The truth was that I wanted Michael to suffer a little. I wanted him to understand what it felt like to be betrayed by someone he loved. I wanted him to learn that he couldn't just abdicate responsibility, that he couldn't just let his wife make all the decisions without knowing what she was doing. I was angry at Michael. I was angry that he had been so naive, so trusting, so willing to believe that Victoria had his best interests at heart. And so I punished him by staying silent. I punished him by letting him think he might lose everything. I punished him by watching him suffer while I held the evidence that could save him. This is the part of the story that I'm not proud of. This is the part that keeps me awake at night. 6 months is a long time to carry a secret. I carried that secret through Michael's growing despair. I carried it through Sophie's increasing anxiety as she watched her father fall apart. I carried it through Catherine's anger when she learned about the accusations, and through David's shock that someone could betray Michael so completely. I carried it through family dinners where Michael talked about the possibility of prison, about the possibility of losing his daughter, about the possibility that his life was over. And I said nothing. I told myself I was planning. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. I told myself that I was being strategic, not cruel. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I was being vindictive. I was letting Michael experience the consequences of his choices before I saved him. It took Sophie to break through my silence. She came to me one afternoon, and she was falling apart. Not falling apart like a child, falling apart like an adult who has lost everything. "Grandma," she said, "I think my dad is going to die." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "He barely eats. He barely sleeps. He just sits in his room and looks at the wall. And Mommy keeps saying that he should just confess, that it would be better for everyone, that she would forgive him and everything could go back to normal." Sophie was 14 years old, and she was watching her father die while her mother lied to him. "Sophie," I said, "I need to tell you something, but you have to keep it secret. Do you understand?" She nodded. I told her everything. I told her about the forged emails. I told her about Victoria's confession to Rachel. I told her about the evidence I had been holding. "Your mother is lying," I said. "Your father didn't steal anything. Your mother is framing him so she can take the company, the money, and custody of you." Sophie's face went very white. "I need you to collect evidence of your own," I told her. "I need you to take photographs of documents you see. I need you to listen to conversations between your mother and her lawyers. I need you to be my eyes and ears in that house." I was asking a 14-year-old child to spy on her mother. I was asking her to betray her family. I was asking her to become complicit in a plan that would destroy her mother. And she agreed. "I'll do it," Sophie said, "but you have to save my dad." That's when I knew I had to act. That's when I gathered all my evidence, the emails, the documentation, the photographs Sophie had taken, the information I had gathered through 6 months of investigation. And I gave it all to Michael's lawyer. The lawyer's face, when I handed over that packet of evidence, was like watching someone understand that they had been given a miracle. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Does it matter?" I replied. "Not legally," he said, "but morally, yes. It matters how we obtained this evidence. If it was obtained illegally, it might not be admissible." It was obtained through investigation, I said. Investigation conducted by me, a private citizen with no illegal access to anything. Everything I have came from public sources or from people who gave me information voluntarily. The lawyer nodded. This will clear Michael. This will put Victoria in prison. This will change everything. I should have felt relief at that moment. I should have felt vindication. Instead, I felt the weight of what I had done. The 6 months of silence. The time I had let Michael suffer. The way I had used his daughter as an instrument of my plan. I had used Sophie to spy on her mother. And I had done it because I was angry at Michael for being naive, for being trusting, for being human. That's the part of this story that I carry with me. That's the part that wakes me up at 3 in the morning. That's the part that makes me question whether I'm a good person or just a person who happened to do a good thing for deeply complicated reasons. The trial date was set for 6 weeks away. Michael's lawyer worked frantically to prepare. He sent investigators to verify everything I had gathered. He interviewed Rachel and other employees. He had the emails analyzed by forensic specialists who confirmed that they had been created on the dates I had identified, not on the dates they were labeled as. Everything checked out. Everything pointed to Victoria as the criminal, not Michael. But Victoria had gotten to the judge first. She had hired powerful lawyers, lawyers with connections, lawyers who knew how to work the system. She had filed restraining orders against Michael. She had gotten temporary custody of Sophie. She had frozen his assets, claiming that they were proceeds of his crime. Michael was not allowed to see his daughter. He was not allowed access to most of his money. He was living in a small apartment, being slowly dismantled by the legal system, while Victoria lived in the house with Sophie and acted like a victim. "The judge doesn't like me," Michael told me one day. "He looks at me like I'm guilty no matter what I say." "The judge doesn't know you," I replied. "The judge only knows what he's heard. And Victoria is very good at controlling what he hears." I attended every preparation meeting. I sat in Michael's lawyer's office as he prepared me to testify. I knew my role in this story was not a heroic one. I was not the grandmother who had saved the day with evidence she gathered innocently. I was the grandmother who had withheld evidence for 6 months because she was angry at her son. But I was also the grandmother who had ultimately gathered the evidence that would save him. 1 week before the trial, Sophie came to stay with me. She was being given special permission by the court to stay with me because I was a neutral party. Victoria didn't object. She was too confident that the trial would go her way. Sophie was a shadow of herself. She had lost weight. Her bright, curious eyes had become hollow. She was carrying the weight of what she had been asked to do. "I'm sorry," I told her. "I'm sorry I asked you to spy on your mother." "Don't apologize," Sophie said, and there was an anger in her voice that broke my heart. She lied to everyone. She tried to destroy my dad. I would have done anything to stop her. "But you shouldn't have had to," I said. "You were 14. You should have been doing homework and going to parties and being a teenager, not investigating your own mother." "Yeah, well," Sophie said bitterly, "sometimes life doesn't care what you should be doing." I held her while she cried, and I thought about all the ways I had failed her. I had failed her by not confronting Victoria earlier. I had failed her by waiting 6 months to act. I had failed her by using her to gather evidence. I had failed her by allowing her to grow up too fast, to see too much of the world's cruelty, to lose her innocence. These were failures I would carry with me forever. The courtroom on the first day of the trial was packed. Word had gotten out. A high-profile businessman accused of embezzlement, a company at stake, a family destroyed. People wanted to watch justice happen. I sat in the front row. Michael sat at the defense table. Victoria sat across from him, looking polished and professional in a pale blue suit, the picture of innocence and betrayal. Sophie was not allowed in the courtroom. We had fought for her to be there, to see her father vindicated, but the judge had ruled that she should not be exposed to the potentially traumatic evidence. I think Victoria had orchestrated that decision too. The prosecution went first. They presented their case, their documentation, their emails. They painted a picture of Michael as a greedy, calculating criminal who had stolen millions from his company and tried to cover it up. Michael's lawyer objected repeatedly. He asked for authentication of the documents. He pointed out inconsistencies, but the judge seemed unmoved. When it was our turn to present the defense, Michael's lawyer stood up with the evidence I had gathered. He presented the smoking gun, Victoria's email to Rachel, the one where she explicitly discussed her plan to frame Michael. The courtroom went quiet. Victoria's face changed. For just an instant, I saw the woman underneath the mask. The angry, calculating woman who had thought she could destroy someone and get away with it. The woman who had never considered that she might be caught. Then she composed herself. Her mask came back. She was the victim again, the betrayed wife, the woman who had been attacked by her accusers. But the damage was done. The evidence was in the courtroom now. The truth was visible. Victoria's lawyer objected. He argued that the evidence had been illegally obtained, that it had been gathered through invasion of privacy, that it should be inadmissible. The judge considered this. He looked at me. "Mrs. Chen," he said, "how did you come to possess these emails?" I stood up. I walked to the witness stand. I took the oath to tell the truth. "I received this email from Rachel Morrison," I said. "She felt that my son was being framed for a crime he didn't commit. She felt that she couldn't speak up publicly because Victoria had threatened her. So she contacted me privately and gave me documentation of what had really happened." "And how did you obtain the other evidence?" the judge asked. "I investigated my daughter-in-law," I said. "I asked questions of people who work for the company. I listened to their concerns. I collected information that was given to me voluntarily. I did not break into anyone's home or office. I did not access any computers without permission. I simply asked questions and listened to the answers." The judge considered this. He looked at Victoria's lawyer. "The evidence is admissible," he said finally. "The method of collection was legal. The chain of custody is documented. This evidence will be allowed in court." Victoria's lawyer began to argue, but the judge cut him off. "I said the evidence is admissible," he repeated coldly. "Do you have a hearing problem?" I think that's when Victoria knew she had lost. The trial continued for 2 more days. Forensic specialists testified that the emails had been fabricated. Rachel testified about Victoria's threats and her involvement in the fraud. Other employees testified about the pressure Victoria had put on them to participate in the false documentation. And Michael testified. He talked about his confusion, his shock, his devastation at being accused of something he didn't do. He talked about not recognizing his wife, about not understanding how someone he loved could betray him so completely. When Victoria took the stand, she tried to maintain her innocence. She claimed that the emails had been falsified by Rachel, that she was the real victim. She cried. She claimed that Michael had forced her to participate in the fraud, that she had no choice. But no one believed her. By that point, the evidence was so overwhelming, the documentation so clear, that her claims were like screaming against a hurricane. When the judge delivered his verdict, the courtroom was silent. The evidence presented in this trial conclusively shows that Victoria Torres engaged in embezzlement, fraud, and attempted parental alienation, the judge said. The evidence shows that she deliberately falsified documents and framed my client, Michael Chen, for crimes he did not commit. The judge paused. He looked at Victoria with obvious disgust. I am not just ruling that Michael Chin is innocent of these charges, the judge continued. I am also ordering that Victoria Torres be charged with fraud, embezzlement, perjury, and conspiracy to commit fraud. I am recommending that she be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. That's when it happened. That's when Victoria completely lost control. She stood up from her chair. She looked at Michael, and then she looked at me. And she came at me. Victoria crossed the courtroom in seconds. Her hand went up, and she hit me across the face with enough force that I fell backward, that I heard gasps from the gallery, that I felt the world tilt. "You disgusting old woman," she screamed. "You have no idea what you've done. You've ruined my life. You've ruined everything." The bailiffs were on her in seconds. They pulled her away. She was fighting them, screaming, her face contorted with rage. But the damage was done. She had shown her true nature to everyone in that courtroom. She had revealed the woman underneath the suit, the woman who was capable of violence, the woman who could not control her anger even when her life was falling apart. When the dust settled, when Victoria had been removed from the courtroom, when the chaos had been processed by everyone who had witnessed it, the judge looked at me. "Are you all right, Mrs. Chen?" he asked. "Yes," I said, though my face was burning. "I'm fine." "Your daughter-in-law will be facing additional charges for assault," he said coldly. "I'm recommending that she remain in custody pending trial." Michael came to me after the verdict was read. He hugged me and he was shaking. "You saved me," he said. "You saved my life." But I didn't feel like I had saved anyone. I felt like I had participated in a complex and destructive game, and everyone had lost something in the process. Victoria was convicted on all counts. She received 5 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. She received an additional year for perjury. The assault on me was treated as a lesser charge, but it further proved her violent nature. She was sent to a minimum security federal prison. She appealed her conviction repeatedly. She maintained her innocence repeatedly. She wrote letters from prison claiming that she was being persecuted, that she was a victim, that everything she had done was in self-defense. No one believed her. But victory came with a price. Michael got custody of Sophie. He got his name cleared. He got his company back and his reputation restored. But he also had a daughter who was traumatized by having been asked to spy on her mother. He had a scar, and so did Sophie, from having witnessed his mother's violence in the courtroom. And he had a question he asked me repeatedly. "Why did you wait 6 months? Why didn't you help me sooner?" I didn't have a good answer. The only honest answer was that I had been angry, that I had wanted him to suffer, that I had prioritized my own feelings over his well-being. "I'm sorry," I told him. "I wanted you to understand what you had done wrong. I wanted you to learn a lesson about trusting people, about not abdicating your responsibility. And while I was waiting for you to learn that lesson, I let your life fall apart." Michael didn't forgive me immediately. He couldn't forgive me for the 6 months I had let him suffer. But eventually we found a way to move forward. He came to understand that my silence had not just been punishment, it had also been insurance. It had forced Victoria to go further, to commit to her plan more completely, to document everything more thoroughly. My 6 months of silence had built a case that was unassailable. "You forced her to be thorough," Michael said one day. "If you had stopped her immediately, her lawyers might have been able to argue that the evidence was circumstantial. But by letting her think she was getting away with it, you made her document everything. You made her create a record of exactly what she was doing." This was true, but it didn't make me feel less guilty for the 6 months I had let him suffer. Sophie recovered slowly. She went back to school. She threw herself into her education with an intensity that was almost frantic. When she was old enough, she decided to become a lawyer specializing in family law and custody cases. I want to help other kids like me, she told me. Kids whose parents use them as weapons. Kids who grow up too fast because of their parents' cruelty. I was proud of her, but I was also heartbroken that she had been put through this, that she had been forced to grow up at 14, that her innocence had been stolen. Michael met someone new, a woman named Lisa who was kind and genuine and made my son laugh again. They married 2 years after Victoria went to prison. It was a small ceremony, nothing like the elaborate wedding Victoria had orchestrated years earlier. At the reception, Michael made a speech. "I want to thank my mother," he said, looking at me. "Not because she saved me, though she did. Not because she gathered the evidence that proved my innocence, though she did that too. I want to thank her because she was willing to do difficult things in order to protect her family. She was willing to be the person who carried the truth even when it was painful. She was willing to sacrifice her own peace for the sake of justice." I cried during that speech. I cried because Michael had found a way to forgive me. I cried because he had extracted meaning from my silence, had found nobility in my cruelty. But I knew the truth. The truth was more complicated than his speech acknowledged. Chapter 9. The Question That Won't Go Away. I'm 82 years old now. I've lived a long life. I've made good choices and bad choices. I've loved people and hurt people. I've tried to do the right thing, and sometimes I failed. But the question I keep asking myself is this: was what I did right? I saved my son. I gathered evidence that proved he was innocent. I was the instrument through which justice was achieved. But I also punished him. I let him suffer for 6 months. I let him think he might go to prison, might lose his daughter, might lose everything. I did this because I was angry. I did this because I wanted him to learn a lesson. I did this because I believed he deserved to suffer a little for his naivety, for his blindness, for his willingness to let Victoria control his life. Was that justified? Or was that just revenge dressed up as justice? I have thought about this question every day for the past several years, and I still don't have a clear answer. What I know is this: I was capable of patience, of planning, of holding on to secrets and using them as weapons. I was capable of putting my granddaughter in a difficult position in order to achieve an outcome I wanted. I was capable of anger and judgment and a kind of cruelty that I didn't know I possessed. These are things that scare me about myself. Michael asked me once, "Do you regret it? Not saving me. I know you don't regret that. But the way you did it, the 6 months of silence." I told him the truth. I regret that you had to suffer. I regret that Sophie had to spy on her mother. I regret that I let my anger drive my decisions. But I don't regret the outcome. You were saved. Sophie was protected. Victoria was held accountable. Justice was served. "But at what cost?" Michael asked. I didn't have an answer to that. The cost was measured in different ways. The cost was measured in Michael's 6 months of despair. The cost was measured in Sophie's lost innocence. The cost was measured in Victoria's 5 years of imprisonment and the destruction of her life. The cost was measured in my own complicity, my own understanding that I was capable of cruelty. Michael eventually said, "I've had time to think about this, and I think I understand why you did it. I think I even understand why you did it the way you did. But I also think you've judged yourself more harshly for it than anyone else ever could." "I used my granddaughter," I said. "I put her in an impossible position." "You gave her an opportunity to protect her father," Michael replied. "Yes, it was a burden. Yes, she had to grow up faster than she should have. But Sophie didn't feel used. Sophie felt like she had agency, like she could make a difference, like she could protect the person she loved. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that by asking Sophie to help, I had given her empowerment rather than trauma. But I'm not sure. I'm still not sure. Chapter 10. The Final Reflection. I'm 82 years old, and I'm running out of time. Not in an immediate way. The doctors say I'm healthy, that I could live another 10 or 15 years. But I feel time slipping away. I feel the weight of my years accumulating. And I've been thinking about what story I want to leave behind. Not the story of how I saved my son, because that's not really the story. The story is more complicated than that. The story is about what justice costs. The story is about the gap between doing the right thing and doing it the right way. The story is about a woman who discovered she was capable of revenge and who had to learn to live with that knowledge about herself. Michael came to me last year and asked if I would tell this story publicly. He said he thought people needed to hear it. He said he thought people needed to understand that justice is not always simple, that good people can do things that are ethically questionable in service of good outcomes, that the world is complicated and messy and full of gray areas. I didn't want to tell the story. I didn't want to admit to the 6 months of silence, to the decision to use Sophie, to the ways I manipulated people and events in order to achieve an outcome that I thought was right. But Michael convinced me. He said that the silence around these things, the pretense that good people only do good things for good reasons, was itself a kind of lie. The truth is, he said, that you made mistakes while trying to do the right thing. And that's what makes you human. That's what makes your story worth telling. So I'm telling it. I'm telling it because I want people to know that justice is complicated. I want people to know that the grandmother who saves the day is also the grandmother who punished her son for 6 months because she was angry with him. I want people to know that being the hero and being the villain are not mutually exclusive. Sometimes you're both. I'm telling it because I want Sophie to know that she doesn't have to feel grateful for being put in an impossible position. I want her to know that it was wrong to ask her to spy on her mother, and that the fact that it was necessary to save her father doesn't change that it was wrong. I'm telling it because I want Michael to know that he was right to eventually hold me accountable. But I also want him to know that I did the best I could with the knowledge I had and the anger I was feeling. I'm telling it because I want people to understand that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, that accountability is not the same as condemnation, that we can do things that are complicated and ethically questionable and still be good people. We're just complicated good people. We're people who made mistakes in service of good outcomes. We're people who lived in the gray area between right and wrong and tried to do the best we could. Last week, Sophie came to see me. She's 25 now, a lawyer, helping families like hers navigate the legal system. She's doing remarkable work. We sat in the garden, on the bench where we've always sat, and we didn't talk about the trial or the past or any of the complicated things that happened when she was 14. We just sat there, watching the light change, watching time pass. And I thought about how she had survived something that could have destroyed her. I thought about how she had taken the trauma of her childhood and transformed it into purpose. And I thought about forgiveness. Not forgiveness in the sense of absolution. I don't think I deserve that. But forgiveness in the sense of being able to move forward, to build a life, to love the people who hurt us despite the fact that they hurt us. That's what Sophie has done. That's what Michael has done. That's what I have tried to do. We're 82 and 35 and 25 years old, and we're all still learning how to live with what happened. We're all still trying to understand whether what we did was right. We're all still carrying the weight of those 6 months, that trial, that moment when Victoria hit me across the face in front of everyone. We're still living in the aftermath. We're still processing it. We're still trying to make meaning from it. And maybe that's the real story. Maybe the real story is that justice is a process, not an event. Maybe the real story is that we don't solve our family's problems. We just keep working on them, day after day, year after year. Maybe the real story is that love is complicated and forgiveness is hard, and the people we need to be grateful to are not always the people who make us feel good about ourselves. Maybe the real story is that I'm 82 years old and I'm still learning. I'm still making mistakes. I'm still trying to be better than I was yesterday. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can do.